Hello, beautiful alchemist. Welcome to Reiki Radio. I am your host, Yolanda, and we have another wonderful weekly series for you. I hope that you have had an opportunity to catch up as we had a little bit of a break, and that's because last week, or by the time this post, maybe 2 weeks ago, I was hosting another Reiki retreat. And so I was very busy, but I'm very glad to be back here with you on the podcast. And there will be more information about upcoming Reiki retreats. So if you want to join me for Reiki classes, be sure that you are signed up for the newsletter. You can sign up at my website, theenergeticalchemist.com. Okay, so back to this week's weekly series. The teacher that we will hear from this week is Holly Hawkins. And if you have been listening to the podcast for a while, you are familiar with Holly's work. She is known for working in the Akashic Records. She is a teacher of the Akashic Records as well. And I have known her now for over 10 years, and her mission is to provide a pathway for people to grow spiritually and enhance their quality of life. And all of her services, all of her courses and events are multifaceted soul and life guidance, which integrates energy work, the Akashic Records, channeling, and the universal sphere. So, we are going to have 3 conversations with Holly this week. And I have to tell you, if you've heard her in interviews before, even here on Reiki Radio, you've never gotten to know her this way. And I'm so excited to share these conversations with you. So we start out in this episode talking about channeling. And the reason I wanted to talk to Holly about this is because this is a technique that all of us have accessibility to do, to recognize, to work with. And she's actually the first person I think that I ever met who was a channel. And she channels different guides or guardians, different, we'll say, aspects of consciousness that provide information about ways to help us work with, the energy of our lives and ourselves, and just really interesting things. So, because a lot of you are curious about channeling or intuitive work, I thought this would be a great place to start with Holly. And in fact, I learned a lot about her myself in this conversation. So, as you will find, we do dive into her path quite a bit. And she shares how she spent her life just trying to feel comfortable. So, I thought that was an interesting insight to who she is, but also it made me think about all of us on our paths and what we have been individually working towards on our life journeys. So, you're going to learn a lot from Holly today. She will share with you a bit about her journey all the way around, but also very specifically about channeling, who she channels, and what she teaches and why. So I hope that you enjoy this episode. If you want to know more about Holly and her work, visit her website, Holly Hawkins, HAWKINS .love. You can also follow Holly on Instagram at holly.hawkins.love. And I will see you on the other side. Okay, everyone, we are here with one of my favorites, my absolute favorite, Holly Hawkins. I do want to say, first of all, thank you for taking time to spend 3 hours with me in conversation today before we even begin.
Well, as you know, first of all, it's an absolute pleasure to be with you. You're one of my very favorite people on the planet from the first moment I met you, and I know people who are Reiki radio, sorry, just
Yeah, yeah.
blanked out on it. Reiki radio listeners may have heard that before, but just that deep soul sister kind of past life connection. And it's just a pleasure. I mean, you and I can get on a phone call and be on there for 3 hours. So we have no trouble talking, and it's just an honor to be here with you.
Well, I'm really excited because I feel like through this, just even what we've kind of discussed in the background, that people will get a real clarity around your work and what it is you hold space for. And in this first hour, we do have a point of focus. But I noticed with you, there is kind of like this golden thread of purpose, which tends to be a big question for people. So I just want to give the teaser that in the third hour, we are going to talk about how you have this incredible way of allowing room for your guidance. But this first hour really points to something that I think supports you in that. So, one of the things that I first learned about you is that you were a channel. And back then, I didn't even know what that was. I didn't, I had never met a channel. I don't think I'd ever heard of anyone who channeled. So, you were literally the first person I ever saw do it, the first time I'd ever been around it. And I was like, what is happening? Right?
That.
Yeah, yeah. My
Okay.
first exposure to it. So this is the one of those things people are so curious about. So before we even get into your point of view entirely and your experience, could you just share, well, from your point of view, what is a channel and does everyone have access to this ability?
Mm. Yeah, the short answer, and then I'll
Yeah.
elaborate a little bit on it, is yes, everyone's a channel.
Mhm.
And that's why I like to talk about channeling because there's got so much mystical, magical, almost like it's too special kind of energy around it. And I just don't believe that at
Right.
all. It's not been my experience. And if everyone has had this experience, everyone, where you're sitting with a friend and they may be having a really troubled moment and you say exactly the right thing they need to hear at that moment in time, and you kind of think, wow, I didn't know I had that in me. Or I've never thought about that before, but that just came across my lips and that was just what they needed to hear. That's channeling. That's channeling. People who refer to themselves as empaths, of which I am too, and we say we're very sensitive to our environment, you're you're channeling consciously or unconsciously energy that's in the world around you into your space, so you're feeling and experiencing it. And so we channel all the time. That wow, that light bulb moment where suddenly I'm turning left where I always turn right, and wow, it turned out that was a really good thing. That's those intuitive downloads, those hits, those are all a form of channeling. And we all do it. We don't have to believe in it. We all do it.
Right.
And to me, channeling is simply tapping into the larger unseen energy field and more of like information systems that are around us and bringing it into a more cognitively aware or sensory wise awareness that we didn't have before. And then allowing that information in whatever way it's coming in to impact us. And I view it as impacting us in a positive way.
Right.
Um, that's sort of my really simplified version of it. But um, I myself, as a channel, never studied anything to become a channel.
Mhm.
But that may be a question for later. So I
Yeah.
don't have a lot of academic background. I have a lot of experienced background, and a lot of what I know about it is through my experience and also the guidance I've received channeling over the years. That has become very integrated into my understanding about life and channeling and energy and our capacity as humans.
Yeah. Now that you say that, it even comes to mind because it seems to be like, even what you're saying, it's one of those natural, it's part of our design kind of
Mm,
things. And yes, we may all work with that differently or even perceive it or receive and translate information differently, but we all have, it's just part of our design. So it just brought up the question about trust. Do you
mm.
think that not just that we may not have an awareness or we didn't have the language of that's what we're doing, do you think maybe a lot of people don't recognize that they're doing this because of how much we don't trust ourselves?
Um, I do think there's a lot of that we don't trust ourselves.
Mhm.
But some of that is because we put a lot of pressure on ourselves
Yeah.
of like it needs to be perfect, it needs to be the most amazing download, it needs to be wildly transformational. And, I don't think we need to put that much pressure on ourselves.
Yeah.
And, because I teach the Akashic Records, which I know we'll talk about, I teach people how to channel. And a very, very common question is, how can I trust what I'm feeling, what I'm
Right.
knowing, what comes through? And the first thing is, I say to everyone, whether they're channeling, whether they're in the Akashic Records, is let's start out with trusting whatever you're getting. We're going to start with that and just assume that you get to trust it. And rather than distrust it, let's trust it from the beginning. And the time to distrust it, if it does not make any sense or it doesn't resonate, then here's what you do. Let it go. Just let it fly back out to the universe. Let's
Yeah.
not take it too seriously. Just say, not mine,
Mhm.
not mine. And we could talk about that maybe in the third hour. There's such a thing about we take on so much stuff that isn't even ours and we feel like it's ours. Like there's so much we can just let go and only deal with what's ours. We have plenty to deal with that. But that idea that if you don't like what you're getting, if it doesn't resonate, not like, oh, I don't like the advice I got, but like, this doesn't feel right to me.
Right.
Let's not make it evil or bad or anything else. It's not a vibrational match. Let's just send it back.
Yeah. Oh,
And
that,
and then we can trust. Just trust.
yeah. Well, that even too, with what you're saying, I think that comes up a lot, right? The doubt of even if something came in or even if something doesn't feel right and I doubt it, again, I don't trust myself, whatever it may be. And I always think of how many times people say, I knew it. Oh, I should have listened to myself. I should have trusted my gut, whatever way we describe it. But you mentioned moving in the direction of resonance, which again seems like a big part of what you hold space for people to
Mhm.
learn and understand. I have to back up into who you've always been before you stepped into this role. Yeah. Like, were you the kind of person, hindsight, that would get a lot of, we'll say, like downloads or inspirations that you did? Were you that person that was like, yeah, I'm going to trust this? I'm going to just go with what feels right to me.
No,
Or did you do that dance as well?
I no, I definitely felt well because I never expected to be where I am right now.
Right.
I never had a plan about it. I didn't even have a dream about it.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a longing that like, oh, I'm going to go study and do these things. The way I kind of backed into where I am right now. And so I can look back on it and I could tell you I was energetically sensitive. I was empathic. And I had a spiritual longing at a very young age.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in a non-religious family, I mean, I grew up in a non-religious family. I was vaguely Christian,
Mhm.
but with no training. We celebrated Christmas and Easter.
Right.
I mean, like nothing, no church, nothing. And at 11, I started taking myself to a local church. And it started out as the local youth group. And I had a longing there. I mean, I didn't put this together until many years later. And I got involved in the youth group and then I was in the choir. And as an elementary school kid, I walked myself to the church on my own. No one else in my family was going there. Again, this is just what I did. But looking back on it, it's like, that's weird, you know? And then when I was in college, I again went back to a church and it didn't resonate with me, but it really, so I've been on this spiritual journey, but like the downloads and stuff, I didn't really look at it that way early on.
Yeah. But I mean, even hearing you say that, though, I was like, but interesting. Clearly, there was something guiding you even early on.
Yeah, and I would say that a lot of I have spent my whole life trying to feel comfortable.
Mm,
I mean, that's honestly when I look back on it is, as a young child, I had things happen in my life and I didn't have the words for it. But I can look back and say, I have been striving to feel comfortable, to feel okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is because of early childhood experiences. And we all have trauma. And I'm not trying to sweep mine under the rug or even make it worse than anyone else's. But that was, I think, my deeper craving, that I felt like there's nothing around me that can satisfy. So I was on this journey. I didn't know that that was the journey I was on, but I was trying to feel better.
Yeah. So that makes me curious too. And this is just knowing some things about you in the background. Someone asked kind of vaguely and you give what you want. But do you think then, because of that wanting to feel comfortable and being kind of drawn to this route of the mystical in whatever form it took, did that also kind of draw you into the people that you went into relationship with? Were they also
Yes.
leaning into these journeys that you were
Yeah,
looking
not
for
so
a little
much
bit?
high school and that
Yeah,
kind of
yeah, yeah.
thing.
But
But
later.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My first husband was, I mean, I met him in self-realization fellowship. We were
That's what I
both
was thinking about.
deeply involved,
Yeah,
and I got involved with that very deeply for over 25 years, I think ish. I'd have to figure out the years. That's close enough.
yeah.
Starting at 21, and it was a very meaningful time for me with that practice and the community around it and all of that. It was a very, and my kids were not so much my daughter, but my two older sons were pretty much raised in that
Yeah.
um, consciousness and that organization.
So I wanted to ask you about that too, because a lot of people don't know what that is. And being here in Southern California, I know that it is connected to Yogananda,
Hmm.
but would you consider that, was it like Buddhist teachings? What was the point of view of the teachings in that?
Yeah, the essence of the teachings there is taking the purity of Christianity and the purity of Hinduism and blending them together. And I'm going to say the teachings and the practices. There was a lot of meditation and not just sitting quietly meditating, but meditative techniques
Mm,
that were intended to work with our energy and our shifting in consciousness.
interesting.
Yeah.
So now I feel like I'm learning new things about you too. So even in that, again, hindsight,
Yeah.
what were you kind of fine tuning yourself in some way through those practices? I mean, that's a long period of time to be in that particular work.
Hmm.
Was that, did you notice how you may have been changing or how that really shaped what came next? So I think of it almost as like the phases that we go through in these
Yeah.
journeys. Yeah. What was do you see now the significance of that phase?
I feel like I needed a spiritual container that had a higher vision to it.
Mm,
And there was a point in time where it didn't serve me in the same way. I still think that the essence of the teachings are beautiful. And but it just wasn't satisfying me the same way spiritually. I still very feel very close to Yogananda. I was never, I mean, he wasn't in his physical body when I
yeah.
was part of it, but I still feel very close to him. I like he is a significant spiritual teacher to me. I'm just not organizationally involved anymore,
Yeah.
but it would, there are many things that I wouldn't be who I am today without that.
Mm,
And I wouldn't be who I am today without that. There was also a woman when I lived in San Diego, who really through prayer in a very difficult moment in my life, I had no resource. I didn't know how to deal with it. And I literally prayed and just said, I need help. And a friend of mine who had been a good friend told me she was going to a women's group. And I started going. And this woman was, yeah, she wouldn't give herself this name, I don't think, but she was like an intuitive psychologist. And she did these women's groups that were so profoundly spiritual and nourishing. And healing that I wouldn't be who I am today without her.
Yeah.
Literally. I mean, like, literally, I would not be who I am today without her. So when you talk about like stepping stones and milestones, that was very significant to me. And that came after I had probably 90% left self-realization fellowship.
Yeah. That's very interesting to me in itself because I think a lot of people get to a certain point in this path and they think like, wow, I wasted so much time or what I know now, I wish I knew then. And we often don't recognize how much we were in the process of, or like we've always been
Yeah.
connected to what was supposed to be and the way these different things added to how we crack open and how we heal and all of these things. It's really interesting hearing this part of your story.
Well, there's another part that keeps wanting to be shared. I'm not sure
Yeah.
why, but in terms of my family history on my father's side, not my mother's side, which you know about, but my father's side, interestingly enough, my grandmother on my father's side grew up in England. All my family is British, and I probably don't have the story exactly right, but she ended up in India. She ended up meeting Krishnamurti. And she spent most of her life in and around Krishnamurti and the Theosophical Society and all of that. And she was a vegetarian from a very young age, which was very unusual at that time. And one of the very, I'll say, famous women at the time that would, like my father grew up in this environment and was a very famous psychic back in the day who actually back in the day was the most studied psychic named Eileen Garrett. She was like one of the people who hung out in my dad's living room growing up. So while that was like a generation before me, I feel like the energy of that
Yeah.
still came through. And my grandmother didn't sit and talk to us, but like we went to Ojai as children, climbed in the trees while Krishnamurti's sitting on the stage talking. And it's just like, so you see all these threads when you talk about threads of
Yeah.
like my life, but like these intersectional things. And I grew up with a father who was an engineer, but later on in his life, after two businesses, he started channeling and he wrote 45 books or something like that
Yeah.
around that. So I don't know, there's these interesting synchronicities, and people say, oh, well, it's in the genes. It's like, yes and no, but it's just sort of in the air
Yeah. Well,
around. So it's all there somewhere.
well, it's funny listening to you say this now. The question is coming. Do you think in part it has to do with that idea that a lot of us, travel in these soul groups and then so it wouldn't be any kind of mistake that you would cross paths with certain people, but also in part, could it be exposure? I mean, how could you be exposed to those kinds of energies and it not have some kind of impact on you?
Yeah, I remember I was a real tomboy when I was a kid, and I remember sitting in a tree in Ojai in this um it was like an outside auditorium, but people were sitting on the grass on the hillside.
Yeah.
And Krishnamurti was I was maybe 8, maybe 10 at the
Yeah.
most. And Krishnamurti was a very small man, and he's sitting by himself on the stage on a little chair, and he sat on his hands, and he referred to himself in the third person.
Hmm.
Now, if there are people in your audience here who know Krishnamurti, they'll go, "Oh yeah, well, of course he did." But I just remember, even as a 10-year-old, noting that he was referring to himself in the third person. Now, I may not have said third person when I was
Right.
that young, but like he's talking about himself, but he's talking about himself like he's talking about somebody else. So, yes, I mean, like somehow, that was in my environment. And so it's all going in. And these were all my grandparents' people, and very eclectic, forward thinking people way back in the day, because my dad was born in the 30s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just like it's all there. Mhm.
Yeah. So this kind of brings it forward to where we were going to dive into with you
Yeah.
as well. And you mentioned that your dad was a channel, and I remember meeting him back in Escondido as well. And he was so interesting. And I think he had just completed one of the books, so he was going to
Mhm.
host an event where he was going to give them away. He would give his work away. I
Always. He
remember
never
that.
charged anything for
Yeah.
any of it. Yeah.
And so, with you recognizing your ability as a channel, did part of it come from um, recognizing this in your father, or did he have any kind of influence on even a curiosity or just your awareness about this?
I'm just trying to think of where that timing and overlap was. I would say, I mean, when he started channeling, I had not been channeling yet.
Hmm.
I was definitely involved in metaphysics
Yes.
and um, again, I'm rolling back through the timing. No, he was channeling before me. Um, I it may have had an impact, but it was not a desire of mine.
Yes.
I had zero desire to channel when it started. In
Yes.
fact, I said, "Don't even bother." Not interested initially.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it didn't impact me that way, I would guess.
yeah. But I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I can't imagine like growing up with a parent who would, who did that. Like, I would think that would be an interesting thing to be around to witness. But it sounds like, I mean, like since a child, you were around very mystical things and
It
people.
was very adjacent though. It's
Right.
not like I was, by the time I was born, Eileen Garrett wasn't around and Krishnamurti wasn't around. And, all those, I would say, free thinkers in that world or alternative thinkers, they weren't around, but it was still in the ethers, so to speak. But I did not grow up with a father who channeled. I mean, he did that much late. I was in well into adulthood, at least
Um,
into my 40s or more by the time he was channeling.
okay. Well,
Yeah.
then
He was an
moving up.
engineer. He was like straight laced, like super analytical, logical,
Yeah.
non-spiritual.
And I will say too, so if people don't know, if they haven't heard your story before, you were also a teacher. You taught elementary school children, didn't you? Or was
Um,
it middle school?
Depending on most of the time I taught, I was a sixth grade math and science teacher.
Yes, math and science teacher. And now look at you now. Just, but just to
I loved
say,
teaching math and science to the kids. It was fun.
yeah, but again, it's like one of those things, if you look at you as a whole, it makes sense. I mean, you're still a teacher.
Yes.
And I would imagine, even that experience working with children, but also teaching, it's a big part of what you even evolved into, so to speak. But now I'm thinking about, again, back when I met you. So my introduction to you was Akashic Records, and we'll talk about that in the next hour. But you also at that time would have these evenings at your workspace where you would channel. And I believe, didn't the High Council of Orion come in before Ishtara? Or
Yes.
yes, because I think it was them first, and later on she came in. Yeah.
It was
So
all
could,
in the same year, but it
mhm.
was literally High Council of Orion in January, Ishtara in December of the same
Okay.
year. 2011 was a big year for me.
I was around for all of it. I remember. Yes, it's very cool. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that because and we'll say you were already at this time working in the realm of energy. You were already working with different energy modalities. You were already working in the Akashic records at the time that I met you, and you were very clearly channeling. So could you talk about how that did start for you? Was it just like out of the blue type of thing? And when you started to accept it, what messaging were they bringing? What did they want to even share through you?
Okay. Um, so I don't know how far back. I'll just be brief about this. It was in 2005. I went on a retreat in Hawaii. And on this retreat, I was guided by the retreat was with a channel. And they said to me, I'm really abbreviating this. They said to me, "You're not doing your life's work." Now, at that time, I was a single parent. And more newly into being a public school teacher. I only taught public school for 6 years. I spent a bulk of I was a mom at home for a lot of years.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I started teaching public school when I was in my 20s or anything like that. I was 40, 42 when I started teaching.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, so I that's what cracked me open into the world of energy healing. I had been doing lots of alternative things over the years with herbs and homeopathy and all kinds of things, but it was related to myself and my family and just helping them and other people around me. So there was nothing I did professionally. I studied and I learned tapping and all kinds of things it was all for personal growth at that
Yeah.
point in time. And so not doing any of that professionally. So 2006 was right after November of 2005. 2006 was when I took my first energy healing course and took a leave of absence from teaching, and that was it. I never went back. And
Wow.
so the channeling that was in 2006. The channeling didn't start till beginning of 2011, and a small group of us met together because we all sort of had this intuitive hit that something needed to come through. And there was somebody else who was going to channel that evening.
Mm-hmm.
And when it actually came down to it, they weren't feeling comfortable with it. And so who knows why? I mean, I just said, oh, okay, I'll do it. Never channeled before, but I said, okay, I'll try it. And I did.
Wow.
And this group of beings came through and they started sharing things and they were lovely. Now, I was pretty insecure about it, except I was very secure with the people I was with.
Yes.
And I really trusted them. And it was not public. It was just, I don't know, 4 or 5 of us, maybe 5 of us. And they started teaching something to us, which evolved into the 111 activation. However, we kept meeting over the months but they did not tell me who they were. Because of course somebody channels and you got to, well, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
Like what kind of non-physical celebrity are you? And they wouldn't say. They did not say who they were for 9 months.
Wow.
And the reason they didn't say who they were is they said, we want you to pay attention to the message and the messages that we're sharing, apply it, see how you're feeling, see if it makes a difference, and kind of like not get distracted by who they were.
Yes.
So it wasn't until September that they said they were the High Council of Orion. Now, I thought it sounded crazy, like High Council of Orion, like who's that? What's that? It's not like Metatron or, anything like that. But they had proven themselves by then, and they were just loving, kind, and who they are as a group of non-physical beings who are here supporting the ascension and awakening.
Yeah.
So in the shortcut version is their ascension guides.
It,
And I share their messages. I've done it with groups. I do one-on-one sessions. So like they're very personal and personable and very kind, loving, understanding. But they ascended as a consciousness over 1 million years ago. So it's kind of like your great grandparents coming to give you advice. They're not going to do it for us, but they can give us advice.
yeah. It's so interesting here because obviously, back then that's when we met. And so I didn't know that this was all so new to you back then. I mean, I wouldn't have known. There's two questions I have for you. One, we have to mention the 111 activation. I have to say with that, because at the time when I met you was, I was like in the first year or the second year of practicing Reiki. So I was still kind of, peeking through the rabbit holes, so to speak. And the 111 activation, I remember how palpable that energy was. It was such a strange experience. It was so cool. And I took the class, and then anyone that I did that for, I remember back then, they were like, what in the heck? Like, no one never, didn't feel that. It was very, very palpable, that energy. I'm gonna have to ask you about that. It was very interesting. But curious, so the High Council of Orion, once they clarified for you and you've started working with them more regularly, did they always come through the same way? Because your voice does change a bit from what I remember. I haven't heard you chant in a while, but I think you do have a different kind of tone when it's them versus, say, Ishtara. Do they?
Less so now than it was back in the day.
Yeah. So, but
Yes.
they still, you can tell that if someone knew you, would they know, like, oh, this isn't Holly
Yeah.
speaking?
I mean, I think by and large, yes. I think as I've integrated, like I feel like I've integrated their energies into who I am. So there's a piece of it that's not quite so different anymore. And the same thing
Yeah.
with Ishtara. But there's phraseology that's different.
Yeah.
Words like, especially Ishtara, she uses like words that are kind of archaic. Like, no, people don't use that word these days. And there's just a pacing to it that's different. Um, and from my perspective, they say things that I've never even thought about before. So, I mean, I know it's different, or not things I would talk about necessarily,
Yeah.
or make connections in ways and explain things in ways that I never would understand. And so it's like it's my voice, but it's also what and how it's said that makes it seem like it's not me. And well, it's not me.
Yeah, no, but also with channeling, that's another question because say you'll see there are 10 different people that say they channel, say like Metatron, right?
Mm.
D do you find or have you even explored, do these different aspects of consciousness tend to give different messaging through different people or just a different way of delivering the same kind of message? Is it, do you think it's based on who you are
Yes.
that they come through the way they come through you?
Yes, and my experience, but also both Ishtar and the High Council of Orion over the years. I've channeled them both so much over the years, like I can't necessarily tweeze out one thing or, like,
Yeah.
oh, for sure they said this and Ishtar said this. But the idea generally is that there's a vibrational match.
Hmm.
So the High Council of Orion could bring through somebody else's message. I mean, a message through somebody else, but that person has a particular vibrational resonance.
Yeah.
So their capacity is so large. I don't need to hold their whole capacity. I channel the part that's a vibrational match to my soul and my mission and my purpose.
Gotcha.
And so somebody else sitting right next to me could have a different mission and soul vibrational pattern. And the High Council of Orion could come through with a different message. It doesn't mean one of us is right or wrong, which I think people like to do that. Well, like, oh, it's different there or there. That's a vibrational resonance. Like, I'm not going to bring through certain information because it's not a vibrational resonance to me.
Right. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But then, speaking of this, when you met with this group and you all are working together, because I vaguely remember the story even about these different activations coming through, were you curious at the time? So, could you just share with people? I mean, you were even guided, you all were guided, I guess, to work with energy in a particular way. And out of that came these different kind of activations. Were you skeptical in any way? Was it hard to kind of follow the steps? Because there's a whole process of it all. And what was that like for you?
Um, I think because it was a group of us and I was channeling the High Council of Orion, but everyone else was contributing also. It was really a collaboration with people's downloads and visions.
Yeah.
And, I also feel like the High Council of Orion was working through all of us. I just happened to be the one whose vocal cords they were using in that overt way. But I
Yeah.
feel like, it was impacted by this collaboration. It was a big process to pull it all together
Yeah.
in the steps because we got impressions and then we had to figure out like, do we have it right? Let's practice that. And let's see how that, like, is that right? So it was a real process.
Yeah.
It might have felt a little bit hard at times, but that was so long ago. Just the overarching thing was that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And interesting too, you think about the time that it came through, because I hear a lot of people seem to have this experience that either something big or that was the time that this started cracking open for them. It seemed like a lot was going on in that time frame. Like around
Really? Oh,
2011, yeah, like 2010, 2011, even 2012. It seems like there was a big shift around that time for a lot of people. So interesting that something like
well,
that
it
would have come
definitely
through.
was for me.
Yeah.
It definitely, I mean, 2011 was, again, I didn't recognize it until I looked back a few years later and I went, holy smokes, look at all those things that happened in 2011. And it's really monumental, but you just kind of do it one thing at a time. It's like, oh, here's this.
Yeah.
Oh, here's this next thing that's a yes. And maybe that ties into our third hour, but like,
Yeah.
oh, here's the next thing. And it just happens. I do want to share about the channeling piece also, which I find humorous personally. I don't know if the audience will, but I said this before. I did not want to channel. I just said, okay, sure, I'll do it. And it became a thing.
Hmm.
And then it became and I was very comfortable in that group, but I wasn't necessarily comfortable channeling.
Right.
And but they became like a security blanket, if you will, for me, like, oh, I can do this with them. And
Yeah.
then it got to the place where it's like, oh, we've got some people gathered. And it's like I referred to myself as a reluctant channel for many years because I didn't seek it out.
Yeah.
And eventually, I'm not a reluctant channel anymore. I mean, I'm totally comfortable with it. But when I remember the first group outside of our little intimate group, that there may be only 9 or 10 people there that I was channeling publicly for the first time, and it was live in person. I always had to cry first.
Wow.
I would sit there and I was so nervous, and then I would cry, and that would like break the tension or break maybe my human resistance, and then the messages would come through. I don't cry anymore now, but it's like it was a process of me, and I view it as because I didn't seek it out.
Right.
It found me. Now it feels totally good now, and I'm glad that I opened up to all of that.
Yeah.
And it's been I would not be who I am today without the High Council of Orion, without Ishtara, without the angelic realm in terms of all the channeling that was done with them.
Yeah. That is really interesting. So you were working with the High Council and then Ishtara, she did make an appearance. So was that an interesting thing too? Was that like totally unexpected? One day you're just sitting and you're like, who is this? And did she have a totally different kind of message or a purpose for working with you?
Yes. So it was the end of the same year that the High Council of Orion started in January, and it was December, and this little group, we gathered together again. We lived all in different states. So like when we met several times that year, it was like we all were exerting effort. It's not like we were neighbors or in the
Right.
same community or even in the same state. So we were gathering again, and there was a sense that there's something different here, but um, that evening when generally we didn't start doing the evening channeling until really late at night. It'd be like 11 to start doing
Wow.
channeling. And I was aware of a very different presence. And it felt very strong, very powerful. It felt very feminine, but also, if I had to give her dimension, I would say this. I think I even said something silly like, this chick wants to get into my body. Um, if I gave her dimension, she felt like she was like 12 feet high
Wow.
and very powerful. And the thing is, I am not a trance channel, I'm a conscious channel. So nobody comes into my body. They get to borrow my vocal cords.
Mm.
So my initial experience with her was as if she wanted to come in. It's like, no, no, no. Now, why do I have that boundary? I don't know. Nobody taught me that, but it's like, no, no, sorry. Nobody's coming in and taking over because I know the woman I went on retreat with back in 2006, she was a trans channel.
Ah,
And it's like, no, I'm not interested in what that does to human bodies. And like that was her experience. Like it was really hard on her human body.
yeah.
I'm like, no, no, you can use these. That's it. So I ended up, I said, you can't come in me, but I'll share what your message is. And she basically said, I'm here to teach you all something. And she said, and that was the beginning of the universal sphere,
Wow.
which I still teach and do sessions for to this day. And it
Yeah.
just keeps growing and evolving because she didn't just come for that. And because she taught it completely to us in that one evening. It was not the long, laborious thing of the 111 activation. It was very quick. It was easy. We started playing with it, and we could tell it was different than the other energy work we had been doing for years. And so it's incredible.
So with that too, and just so people know, they can work with you in that energy in sessions. Like you can do universal sphere sessions. You can even do channeling sessions with you. So I wanted to ask you about that too. One, how did you start to recognize, or how would you describe that working with the High Council and working with Ishtara, where it became more personal, that they started working as maybe let's say like guides for you and even showing you, let's say like the gift of being able to tap in, tune in, and recognize the information that was coming into you. How did it serve your path, basically?
Right. It became my path.
Yeah.
Basically, going back to the High Council of Orion's early guidance of just listen to what we have to share with you. If it resonates, great. If it doesn't resonate, great. There was no pressure or no dictate around it. And with the High Council of Orion and Ishtara, the guidance was really elegant and beautiful and simple. And what I feel about both of them, I'm going to refer to them each as thems, but you know, Ishtar has this beautiful way of taking what we know and turning it like 10, 25 degrees, showing it to us at a different angle and
Yeah.
saying that's where the truth is.
Mm.
Or sometimes 180 degrees. But the idea is it's like it's all here. And years ago, the High Council of Orion said, you do not need anything off planet. Everything you need is here, but you have to reframe how you look at and see the world to get what's here. I mean, this was many, 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 it could have been over 10 years ago. They channeled a message and talking about the color in the flowers and just like all kinds of things. Like you actually seek things off planet, and that's fine because it's all part of this multiverse, this field of oneness. But all of it that you need is actually you have all the raw materials here.
Yeah.
So just listening to what they had to share, applying it, and allowing it to shift my life and my awareness is, as I said before, I wouldn't be who I am today without their guidance.
Curious about this too. I mean, now that it has been so many years in working with them, do you get the sense when people are working with guides, whether they're directly aware of channeling them or not, how whatever the dynamic is, do you get the sense that you've worked with them before? Like, have you worked with them maybe in different incarnations, other iterations, where you maybe a part of the High Council? Do you see what like is does there start to become this familiarity where you're like, wait a minute, I've
Yeah,
known you before?
100%. So Ishtara and I and you, um, one of the things Ishtar, so I think Yolanda would agree. I mean, she and I go way back to like temples of Isis together.
Yeah,
And so that's how when I first saw her walk into the healing studio we had back in the day, it's like kind of like, oh, you're this deep old friend that I'm meeting for the first time in this lifetime.
yeah,
But it's Ishtara. What Ishtara explained is that she and I have been together since that time. And sometimes it's like now I'm embodied and she's not. Sometimes it's reversed. Sometimes we're both in spirit. Sometimes we're both in physical. So it's this long abiding soul connected relationship.
yeah.
And the High Council of Orion, I don't normally talk about this out loud, but you actually already kind of said it. I mean, I'm here and I'm also there at the same time. I don't, that's like so out there and so bizarre that I don't normally talk about it.
It's
And
becoming normal now.
I don't formally understand it, and
Yeah,
I also just accept it. There are a lot of things that I accept that people say, but aren't you asking them about these things? Why don't you know more? It's like because I accept what it is, and to me, I'm still I'm still trying to find that place of being comfortable as a human being.
yeah,
So I can just accept it. Like their guidance, their wisdom, their love, their care, whether it's I get a little message on my way, just doing my life, I'm not sitting and formally channeling anything,
yeah,
or whether it's in a formal channeling session, um, we're so integrated that there's no different. I don't need to get the academics around it. That's me.
yeah.
Like I just accept it. I don't need to know all the details. And by the way, for I probably somebody's going to ask, people like to look up the name Ishtara in on the Google searches, probably in the AI searches now
Yeah.
too. And years ago, we asked about that.
Mhm.
And she said, "You're not going to find me." Like, there might be references of the same name, but it's not me.
Yes.
She said, "I'm not written about in your world."
That's interesting because there's this one name that came to me many, many years ago, and I've Googled it so many times and can find no reference to it. And I was like, God, this is so interesting. And I finally let it go. But it was
Yeah,
one of those things where you think like it must be somewhere. I mean, not even on like the baby name search. Like there's
right.
no translation of the name, no anything. But this brings me into because I know that you do, or you have at least, also taught people how to channel and
Yes.
how to work with this ability. So could you talk a little bit about, again, like why? Why would someone be curious to do it? How might it support us in our work and our path? But do you still offer this?
Mhm.
Do you still teach people how to channel?
Yeah, and my journey, as you referenced before, basically my foundational energy is as a teacher.
Yes.
Like even before I became a public school teacher, I taught swimming lessons when I was a kid. And when my kids were young, I taught knitting at their school and recorder music. And like I'm just foundationally a teacher. I was a day camp counselor too, and all that kind of stuff when I was young. So I teach everything I learn.
Mm,
Why? Because I feel like I want people to be empowered to do, if they're drawn to it, to do what I know and I'm happy to share. The thing that was interesting is when I started channeling, people, of course, started because they know I'm a teacher, will teach me how to do it. And I said, no. And for a number of years, I said, no, I'm not going to do that.
yeah.
And because nobody taught me to, so like I don't even know, which was kind of a funny thing now that I look back on it, but I was very clear, no, I'm not going to teach people how to channel.
Yeah.
Then one day, the High Council of Orion came along and said, "We're going to do it with you.
Wow.
And it's time for you to teach people how to channel." And I went, "Oh, okay, I'll do it with you." And then I had zero resistance to it. And so literally, they and I metaphorically sat down while I was at the computer and like, let's design a program. What do you want to do? And so that's how that came about. I usually teach it about once a year, and
Yeah.
it'll be on my calendar later on in this year. But it's not on my calendar yet. And I teach it from literally from the foundation that if you have a desire, you can do it.
Yeah.
And that's not to sound yay, cheerleaderish. It's because it's 100% true. There are people who I've met who have even taken other channeling classes and they said, I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's different about the way I teach it, except I know that if you're there and you want to do this, you can, period.
Yeah.
beyond a shadow of a doubt. Like, of course you can. It's like in our hardwiring, because channeling is us expanding our connection to the field of information around us. And we all are innately wired to do that. Now, we may have lost our ability or not even be taught how to do that, but it's intrinsic to who we are as human beings. And during this time of our awakening, this is what's waking up,
Yeah.
our ability to say, we live in a unified field. We live, as Ishtara says, in a field of infinite possibilities. And so when we start opening up to that and saying, I don't have to wait to be 5D or whatever D you want. We're like Matryoshka dolls, and 3D is sitting within all the other Ds. And so if we expand out, we can bring in what we need to enhance right here where we are without needing to wait until we're in some other dimensional reality to then have the goodies and have the abilities and have the peace and the love and the connection and all that. I believe we can do that right here.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so I do want to ask, what are the reasons? So I'll say it to you this way, and I've told you this before, but I started receiving downloads when I was going to the Akashic records every day, and we'll talk about that in the next hour. Um, and then, but what happened over the years is I, and it's not even by choice, but it seems to be like I'm only in that frequency primarily if I'm teaching a class. So, like, if I'm teaching a class now, it's almost like I just know without a doubt information's going to come through. I'm going to channel, it's just going to happen. It doesn't happen when I'm having conversations just with like a friend on the phone. If I am trying to like be aware, tuned into information for myself, it's likely that it's only going to happen if I'm writing. So like if I do writing, yeah, stuff will come, but it's still not the same texture as what comes through if I'm in that space of teaching. So somewhere in my mind, even now, I've associated with like, yeah, I channel in class. The end. No, it's not going to happen just like, in the other parts of my life, at least not at all in the same way. So I said to say, when people do learn to channel, and even for yourself, does it tend to be like for different reasons for different people? Like for some people, is it for a particular part of life? Do some people use it primarily for guidance in their own life? Is it just all across the board? What have you noticed?
I think it's kind of all of the above in terms of my own use, but also in people who've been in my classes, or a lot of it. I would say 50% or more of the people who come just want to learn to channel for themselves
Yeah.
and to enhance their own life and their own experience, and maybe to sort of prove to themselves that it's possible,
Yeah.
but they don't have an intention of being out there in the world publicly channeling, whether it's, on YouTube or whether it's just on one-to-one sessions. They have no intention of doing that. Now, of course, there's some people who think they came to the class for that and it transforms into doing it for other people. But some people really want to be a conduit for higher level guidance for other people. And so, when I teach my classes, it's usually about 50-50. But what I will tell you over the years, with all of the work I do, I see more people coming for their own personal development.
Yes.
I see that, like I would say when I started out, especially with the Akashic records and the energy healing work, more people were initially coming because they knew, just even by signing up, they wanted to move in a professional direction with it.
Right.
And over the years, the last 15 or however many years, I feel like I've seen a lot of shift where a lot of people want it for their personal use, family, friends, their own life enhancement.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's true. I noticed that even on the Reiki side of the fence that there's more of that now as well, which is a very interesting thing. But
I think it's great because I think it's indicating that it's becoming more integrated as an essential tool for life,
yes,
because if I'm just learning it so I can enhance my family, my home, my friends, it's really grassroots that way,
Yeah.
right?
No, 100%.
And
So
now you
that,
have a lot more empowered people on the planet, whether it's not only the people who want to do it professionally, but kids who grew up with Reiki as a everyday thing in their household.
yeah. And in just thinking, like I know someone who's chiropractor is an energy worker. Now there's a lot of therapists who are getting into just people who, again, it's maybe not necessarily their career, but people are even starting to infuse what they're working on personally into all of these facets of, more traditional lines of work, even, which is very interesting.
But that's
Um,
part of what our ascension and awakening is
yeah,
not living in so much duality and separation. It's this or that. I mean, we're the our to me, the summary word of our awakening and ascension is and. It's not this or that, it's and.
yes,
And really seeing how the sameness and the integration and how everything magnifies when we bring things together,
yeah. I love
including people. Like, this is why so many of us are craving getting back together again and being
it.
in real time, whether it's classes or more social events. It's like we magnify and we can do more in community and connection and collaboration. And because we didn't come here to be an island. You don't come to this planet with all these people on it to be an island. You come here to co-create.
I love that. I literally just, I think it was yesterday, I was saying, I mean, think of even how we came. We didn't come to not be seen, to not be felt. Like you can't not. I mean, one, these bodies are so visible, but then we have this energetic expression that's happening all the time. You have like all of these ways of literally being seen, heard, felt up and down the street. And so you came here to be seen, heard, and felt,
Right.
essentially. Otherwise, what would have been the point in coming in a body? Yeah, it's very cool. So I do want people to know, what is the best way to look you up in order to see what classes, because you offer different classes throughout the year, but
Yeah.
there are also one-to-one sessions. People can work with you one-on-one. What's the best place to go?
My website is hollyhawkins.love.love, and just that. And on there, you'll see the Akashic records and channeling and courses. And as Yolanda knows, I'm very involved with something in my family right now, and so my calendar looks quiet in terms of courses that are being offered. But as the year goes on, like by summer and into the fall, more will be on there. So you can always just join my mailing list, and you'll get notified when I'm offering things. I'm offering a lot more small workshops, like just this weekend, having one come up that they're just small tastes to
Yeah.
see, how things resonate, and see if things are a good fit. Because the reality is there's so much to choose from out in the world, and we don't need to necessarily dive headfirst into a training program, and we can just taste and experience. And yeah, and my one-to-one sessions are available on my website too.
Okay, so hollyhawkins.love is the
Yes.
website. The link, of course, will be down in the show description. But you can also follow Holly on Instagram at holly.hawkins.love. And I'll put the link for that down in the show description as well. I have to tell you, I learned so much about you in this first hour.
Really?
Yes. Yes. But I thank you
After all
so
this
much.
time.
I know after all these years. And again, like you said, we can talk for hours when we do get on the phone. But I do thank you for sharing with us about channeling and so much about your path. And just so everyone knows, you want to be sure to tune in on Wednesday because we're going to keep this conversation going with Holly about the Akashic records. And there's so much around this I have to question her about because I feel like this is another area of your life that is quite literally opened up in ways I'm sure you didn't expect.
Yeah.
So If you are someone curious about the Akashic Records, you already work with them or never even heard of them, I'm sure you don't want to miss this conversation. I also want to point out if you have any questions about what Holly shared today, email her. Let her know. Reach out to her, go to her website, and we will see you Wednesday. Bye for now. Okay, beautiful alchemist. I hope you enjoyed this first hour that we had with Holly and talking all about channeling. And the conversation continues. We are going to now pivot into talking a bit about the Akashic records, the Akashic realm, and again, maybe in a way that you've not heard it discussed before. So we really go deep with Holly, and she shares with us how the Akashic records point to who you are right now, and that episode will air on Wednesday. So, again, if you want to know more about Holly and her work, visit her website, hollyhawkins.love. You can follow her on Instagram at holly.hawkins.love. If you want to know more about me and my work, go to theenergeticalchemist.com or follow me on Instagram at Reiki Radio. I hope you have a gorgeous day and remember to always journey in love.